Xi Jinping will visit France and Europe soon. Are we friends or foes? Have we decided what China means to us and vice versa? The stakes are high, and will they rise to a culmination, or can we in Europe expect to muddle through? So, it's big business and grand strategy yet again. Join me, Jan Darasz, on how we got here.
Relations between China and Europe have been getting worse since China took Russia's side after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Xi Jinping's so-called no-limit partnership with Vladimir Putin bruised China's relationship with the EU so hard that Europe blacklisted several major Chinese companies that still exported to Russia. However, as the Chinese president's first visit to the old continent since the COVID-19 pandemic creeps around the corner, Beijing is trying its best to fix its relations with the whole of Europe, from their contentious stance on the war in Ukraine to environmental issues and trade. French President Emmanuel Macron, who will be hosting Xi Jinping in early May, has been supportive of working with Beijing to ensure mutual economic growth. Macron has also gone on record saying Europe should not get caught up in the US-China conflict over Taiwan's independence, while at the same time pushing for the EU's reduced dependence on Washington. Xi Jinping isn't the only Chinese official to take a trip to Europe this year. Beijing's Special Eurasian Affairs Envoy, Li Hui, is currently on a tour of EU countries, as well as Russia and Ukraine. Beijing has been trying to convince the EU to let Russia sit at the negotiating table regarding a truce in Ukraine, to no avail. With all that being said, despite their best efforts, it seems that it will take a lot of time and a lot of effort for China to return to its role as a business partner for Europe.
I'm delighted to welcome as our guest today Dr. Marcin Przychodniak, who is an analyst at the Asia-Pacific Centre at the Polish Institute of International Affairs and also has been a diplomat in China herself. So welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. We'll start off with this impending visit of Xi Jinping to France. So why France? Why shortly? Few weeks' time? What's going to happen there, do you think? Why is he doing it?
Well, the visit was actually prepared for quite a while, so it's not like that it was just invented a couple of weeks ago. And technically, it's a revisiting. President Macron visited China last year, and it was quite a bit surprising visit from the EU perspective too. I mean, from what President Macron said when he left China about Taiwan and all these issues. So he needs to then explain himself a bit. But now Xi Jinping is coming to France mostly because he wants to strengthen the idea how China sees the relationship with the EU. With France too, but specifically, but you know, France is being perceived by the Chinese as one of the most important member state of the European Union, and the other one is of course Germany. But then Chancellor Scholz is coming to Beijing month before Xi Jinping will be in Paris, so then he will have a chance to actually visit and talk to both leaders of the countries that he actually perceives as the most important countries of the EU. And he will present them some kind of Chinese ideas about how the EU-China relationship should be built on, and how the EU should behave in order to get the better relationship with China. And not get me wrong, I mean, for China it's also important to have the EU relationship stronger a bit because of its economic problems which it has.
How does Xi Jinping actually conduct these conversations? Are they done in a very diplomatic way, a very guarded way, or is he confident enough to be more direct?
No, it's not very direct. No. I mean, the last direct leader, even if we can call him direct, it was Jiang Zemin. He used to be very open, but in his interactions with foreign leaders. No, these are very detailed and orchestrated visits by the Chinese diplomacy. So it will be prepared before, for sure. He will just come and deliver the message. Of course, there is some part of these head-to-head talks, these are not private, but face-to-face talk between Macron and Xi Jinping, when they will probably mention some ideas, and Xi Jinping especially will try to deliver the message more openly than it was in our official statement. But I would not find there wouldn't be much differences. I mean, he would of course try to influence a bit the French in their thinking about the strategic autonomy. You know, he will point out these examples that he identified as French weak points in terms of their attitude towards China and in terms of their attitude towards EU policy towards China. Which part of it is the idea of having a stronger strategic autonomy, which in Chinese perspective also means the weaker relationship with the US.
Is that the overriding aim to, we talked about this earlier, to keep Europe divided within itself and to also keep it divided from the United States? Is that his overriding strategy?
Yeah, these are both probably the most important examples of a policy, of a China policy right now, the most important factors of a China policy right now. But I would say that the US factor is becoming more important even than dividing EU itself. What China would like to get from the EU right now is to use up the fears that are building up within the EU community because of the possibility of Trump being elected again, and show up to the EU that they cannot have two rivals on the same. They cannot fight two wars, hypothetically, two rivals, China and the US, after the elections. So they need to decide to change their policy in a way that China can become their cooperator, can be their partner, but it requires actions from the EU, and of course it requires not to intensify the whole de-risking strategy started by the European Commission, and that's probably one of the main messages.
Is there still a high level of mistrust towards China on this level? You know, he says you can't have two, you must choose one. What's the European response likely to be?
I think we already experienced this response, and this is going to be quite important. The response in terms, and repeated through, especially after the EU-China summit last one. So it will be mostly saying that we cannot have any kind of stronger relationship with China unless it changes its policy towards Russia, unless it stops helping Russia to avoid sanctions or supporting Russian economy in its military mode. And that keeps EU from strengthening the relationship with China, and that brings China to the EU concerns not only because of its economic actions, but also because of its influence on European security. I mean, there has been quite recently a visit by the Chinese government special envoy for Eurasia, Li Hui. He visited certain European capitals, and one of the messages he made was that China wants to be part of the reconstruction of European security architecture, which is of course, also one of the statements which Russian politicians been doing for quite a while, and that is quite a worrying thing for not only Central Europe but also for the Western Europe too. So yes. Generally for the European Union.
We have to mention Russia again. I suppose we can't avoid it. What do you think is the status of having Russia as an ally now for China? Is it a liability, or is it still in the terms of having this forever friendship that we saw a couple of years ago, President Putin and Xi Jinping having a great meeting together?
No, they said originally it was partnership without limits, and it has limits, and we have to admit, and I think Chinese and Russians knows that has limits. But for the Chinese, the most important is their strategic goal that they share, and both countries believe that the US is about to go and change the regimes, both in China and in Russia. And that's the observation they share. And the other thing, a strategic goal that China has and Russia is very useful in terms of helping it to work on that, is that the remodeling of international order contrary to the US. And that keeps China, that brings Russia as an important partner for China.
Yes.
And so that is out of the table in terms of changing this attitude. And so that we shouldn't count on China in changing its policy towards Russia. But that doesn't mean, as I said, that there are no limits to that partnership, and that doesn't mean that Chinese are not trying to use up the situation when Russia is actually becoming weaker, and Russia is a younger brother or younger sister in that equation. And so Chinese are trying to use it in Central Asia, in different parts of the world, in the Middle East, for example, trying to use up the situation politically, with relations with the global South. I mean, they present it as a leader. I mean, not mentioning about Russia anymore, but still, the strategic goals I mentioned in the beginning, these are the most important from the perspective of Chinese leadership.
Can you sketch in how the world looks from the Chinese position on the map, on the globe? It sees the world. Does it see it as a hostile world, or as a world that has plenty of opportunities, plenty of room for cooperation? How do Chinese strategists see the movement of the world? I mean, you said that it obviously doesn't want the United States to dominate the world, so it wants a multipolar kind of situation, a situation of power. How can you fill us in? How does a Chinese strategist think?
I mentioned this goal of this way of thinking, how U.S. influences the world against China, and this is a predominant feature in way of Chinese strategic thinking. They actually believe that the conflict with the U.S. is inevitable. It will happen someday. It just does. We don't know when and how, but it will happen, and China and U.S. will try to change the regime. So that influences everything, way of thinking, how China perceives the situation. And if we go back to the situation right before the Russian invasion in Ukraine, the Chinese were already trying to prepare themselves to speed up the growing of potential, economic, military, political potential. Relationship with the global South was part of this keeping partner countries against the Western narratives, but pro-Chinese. Russian invasion in Ukraine changed a bit of way Chinese thinking. It speed up the processes in one way. So, but also, it just creates the situation when you read the Chinese statements right now, the policy documents, that whenever they write that this era of global growth, which of course China benefited very much, is ended. There's no way of the strategic era is finished, and now the difficult times are coming, and we have to prepare for them in all the different sectors, right? I mean, so we have to prepare politically, so we have to build up the network of partners under our leadership, of course, because there's Sino-centric thinking. There's no kind of equality thinking, but politically, economically, of course. So we have to somehow find a way to remodel the economy, and that's probably one of the worst problems for the Chinese right now. And military, we have to speed up the process of transferring the military potential.
As we wind up our discussion, just one last question about this Belt and Road Initiative. Is that something that very ambitious program for China? Is that something that has succeeded, or is that just a case of imperial overstretch? As it completes its sea lanes, the routes, the overland routes? How do you judge that for the moment?
I always looked at it as a rather political initiative than the economic one, because if you want to find out whether it's a success or not, you can take different examples of projects which were actually finished, but some of them were not part of the BRI officially. Some were included, so it was rather from the beginning this kind of another way of keeping partners together and using up the opportunities when they are created by their partners, right? So which country wanted to cooperate with China on different aspects, they could use up the opportunity of Belt and Road, different funds, or the Chinese companies investing. But it's changed a bit. If you look at the statements after the BRI forum last year in Beijing, it's again another part of orienting towards global south right now. And it's partially also because of the Chinese economic problems, the lack of investment, and then the lack of Chinese investment capabilities to actually use up resources abroad. It's not that easy as it was before for the Chinese to actually be able to fund the projects or even loan the money.
Okay, unfortunately we have to stop it there. So Dr. Marcin Przychodniak, thanks very much for coming onto the programme. And that's all we have time for today. Join us again for How We Got Here.